Okay, well, it's taken me a while to get back to this trailer. I've had a lot going on. I've got other projects starting now, but I want to get this to a point where I've got it insulated. I got the wall panels back up. I got the wires coming out to various future loads. Initially, I thought I would complete the whole trailer, but I kind of like the idea of basically getting it back to an empty shell. So whoever buys it will be able to finish it how they want. That's the plan. So today, ripping down this OSB, adding them to the studs, making the walls a little bit thicker. Then we'll be insulating and putting the wall panels back up. Yeah, it's kind of a daunting task, not gonna lie. It's not very difficult, but as you can see, it's flannel and lined pants weather. I'll try to keep the sniffling down to a minimum, but no guarantees. Sheep's wool to the walls, more wool up top. And the neat thing about my design too is somebody mentioned in the comments, and I haven't really mentioned it before, but I'm hoping that having that deck up there and then the solar, it's blocking the roof. So we're not going to have as much direct sunlight. So even if you don't use the roof deck, it still kind of serves a purpose. So I kind of like that. But anyway, that's the plan. As of right now, these studs, they're about an inch deep. I bought this OSB 3 product, meaning it is meant for humid environments. So we're going to add that to the studs, and then we'll have enough room for that 2-inch bats. So I'm going to rip this down on my table saw, make a bunch of strips. I'm going to have to like piece them in there to get around various things. Ugh. Can't get this thing insulated soon enough. After I got my measurements, ripped the OSB down, cut it to size on my miter saw. No two studs were the same size, so I was trying to keep everything organized, but eventually I got everything staged back in the trailer. Oh my gosh, it's crazy windy out here. This is crazy. Got some chai, heated jacket, fleece lined pants. This is what you got to do when you're trying to build a camper in November. I might just fly away, honestly. This is crazy. Since I pre-measured and cut all of these furring strips, they went up pretty quick. Also, I used self-tapping screws meant for metal. That means no pre-drilling through the wood or the metal stud behind it, so it really makes things go a lot faster. Now this comment comes from my exterior ladder install video. He suggested I use pocket holes to further strengthen the wood bracing I added for the ladder. I hadn't considered doing that. It was a little tricky to do after the fact, but I managed to do that, so now this ladder is going to be even stronger. So thank you, Peter, for that great suggestion. Now I am disappointed to say I didn't get any recording of the actual wool insulation. There was a time where I wasn't recording anymore. I was just going to pound out the work. I was getting overwhelmed. Winter was long. Momentary lapse in judgment because I did end up recording the rest of it. Warmer weather means I was able to finish the trailer, so now I'm going to be pumping out more videos. So I want to talk a little bit about insulation. I've attempted to make this part of the video, I don't know, a few times now. I'm struggling to find a compromise. I want to tell you why I choose wool, why I don't like other methods for insulating this trailer, but I don't want this to get crazy, crazy long. This company, Havelock Wool, they do a lot with the camper van industry. They are also getting into residential applications as well. But in terms of a trailer like mine, I'm convinced this is the best method. A metal frame trailer is so different from a house in how it's constructed, how thick the walls are, thermal properties of metal versus wood. They're not the same thing. I'm going to increase the wall thickness from 1 inch to 2 inches, but that's still not enough space to have proper thermal breaks. And when you're dealing with metal that easily transfers the temperature, you need that. So since we don't have that, we're going to end up with condensation. Whatever temperature it is outside, that's what that metal is going to be on the inside. You try to change the temperature on the inside, where those two temperatures meet, that's where we get condensation. You can put a vapor barrier in there, but that's not guaranteeing the vapor is going to be on the outside of that vapor barrier. The chances of condensation are way higher than they are with a wood frame structure. Because at least campers are typically wood framed. You can't even compare this to that. It's a moving trailer, seeing a lot of vibration. You're going to see temperature swings, not what you're typically going to have in a constantly conditioned house. Stuff's going to break down. The sealant is going to break down. If you're trying to seal that vapor barrier, it could shift and move. So it might not be a problem right away. Maybe you don't care because you only need the trailer to be good for 5 years, and maybe you're going to get rid of it. I'm not cutting corners intentionally. I'm never going to do that. That's just not in my nature. It's a very common discussion in the camper van community. Do you think you can keep moisture out? Do something like foam or 3M makes thinsulate, like what you find in a winter jacket or what you find in boots or gloves. The wool people say, I think moisture is inevitable. Maybe not right away, but eventually you're gonna have moisture in those walls. It doesn't matter if it's foam or thinsulate, it will basically just trap the moisture. The product itself might not have an issue with water, but it's gonna trap that moisture. It's not gonna have anywhere to go. If you have any sort of wood furring strips or wood products in the wall or at the floor, it's gonna rot. If you have a steel structure, it's gonna rust faster. Plus, as much as I can, I like green products. I'm not somebody that's going out of my way to use everything green all the time. I am an advocate for that 3M Fast Cure sealant. That probably is the least green thing that there is, but there's a time and a place, and I don't like the idea of using chemicals inside if at all possible. On top of everything that I've already said, foam is a little bit harder to work with. In the future, if you have to do any renovations, if you have to add anything, if you're trying to diagnose some problems, everything's going to be encapsulated in that foam, or you're going to have to cut foam out. It's not very renovation friendly at all. And when I'm trying to sell this to somebody that might add something down the road, that's just not a good option. So telling you why I don't like all these other products, I haven't even gotten to the best part yet, which is why wool is so awesome. It's great for a lot of reasons. It's got great R value. This 2-inch bats, it's R7, it can get really wet. Wool can hold up to 33% of its weight in water and still be insulating. There's no other product out there as far as insulation that can absorb water. None of them will maintain their insulative properties when they get wet. It's a good thing to know that it can get really wet and still be insulation. And it's not going to mold and mildew, believe it or not, because it's made up of keratin. I think that's like what your nails are made of. It's inherently a mold and mildew inhibitor. It actually filters air. Everything that we put in our homes, a lot of things we put in our campers, they off-gas. You see a lot of people putting vinyl in their campers, different paints that will off-gas. A lot of wood products, they're still using formaldehyde. I don't understand how we're still using harmful chemicals, especially when we're putting them in our homes. It's bad enough in a home where you have airflow, right? In a camper, you still have airflow, but it's a much smaller space, so I feel like it's more concentrated. So all the more reason to not use those products, but if you have to use them, at least wool is proven to actually neutralize a lot of those VOCs. It locks into the fibers of the wool, gets it out of the air, and it will hold on to them. I think it's for up to 30 years. Don't ask me how it does it. I really don't know. But I haven't even gotten to the best part. We've been talking about all the moisture, right? Yes, it can hold 33% of its weight in water. That's great until you think, well, it's just going to hold on to the water. It's just going to be sitting in the walls. That's not any good. That's not any different from anything else that you just talked about, right? Unlike thinsulate or water sitting in a wall next to foam, wool actually wicks water into itself. So it will wick water away from whatever surface it's in contact with. It'll wick it away from your steel if you have a steel frame structure so it won't rust. It'll wick water away from wood so it won't rot. It will prevent water from pooling in the bottoms of your wall. It wicks it in when it's really humid, and it will hold on to it until that environment, the relative humidity drops. Then it releases it into the air, preventing it from just concentrating in the walls and dripping down and collecting and getting worse and worse over time. So that's the biggest misconception with wool, is people, they're turned off by it because they think it's just gonna hold water in the walls, and that's just simply not true. If you allow the walls to breathe, it will improve air quality and the moisture will get out. I don't know how it happens. I have to trust the science. I have to trust the research that has been done. It sounds like hocus pocus, but I can speak from firsthand experience now that I've used it in a number of vans. I've had no moisture problems whatsoever. This stuff is standing the test of time. One thing I see people do is they put this in their walls and they don't give it any opportunity to breathe. We'll see later on in my video that the tops of my walls will breathe. The ceiling, there's going to be gaps in different places where there can be a little bit of airflow. So that's what's key. You do not want to use a vapor barrier. The moisture will essentially still be trapped. So I've seen professional companies even use wool and a vapor barrier. They're trying to limit how much moisture gets in the walls, right? And if any gets in there, it'll just hold on to it. But how long can it hold on to it before it gets past that 33%? It probably is a long time for that to happen. But personally, that's what I do. I try to let the walls breathe. I try to let the ceiling breathe. The other thing people mention about wool is they say that it's flammable. While it does burn, it's not going to spread like a wildfire if you put a flame to it. It actually has some fire retardant properties to it, and I think that's partially inherent to wool, but also related to the acid that they wash it with. I've seen this tested before, but I gotta try it for myself. I'm honestly surprised I've never done this before. So I've got a butane torch. Let's see what happens. It's interesting, you can see the flame initially, it spreads a little bit, and then the flame just goes out. It's just staying on the surface. A lot of smoke, doesn't smell great. It seems like if you get that charred surface and then you go over that same area again, it does a lot less on that second pass. It's almost like when it burns, it forms a sort of fire retardant shell. I'm going to try to be a little bit more aggressive at this point. And like I said, it just really doesn't advance that much more. Obviously, this is a pretty significant amount of fire being directed right at the wall. If you have this much fire in your wall, I think it's safe to say there's a lot of other things that are going to be burning at this point. This isn't going to act as a main fuel source for the fire. You have to think about how fires are typically started. It's probably going to be either cooking or electrical. Neither scenario is probably going to end well, but I think it's safe to say that wool isn't going to exacerbate the situation. All right, so I'm going to concentrate one last time in a single spot. Again, it's like the wool fibers that are exposed to the flame, they all shrivel down, they come together, and they form a protective shell. Pretty amazing. I didn't think I could like wool any more than I already did, but seriously, this stuff is amazing. All right, so I just have a couple more things to tell you about wool, and then we'll get back in the trailer. It's affordable. 2 boxes of this. I think each box is 150 square feet. They're 150 bucks a box, I think, and I needed 2. They get you a little bit on shipping, but even then it's still cheaper than I think any other option out there for certain applications. I do think there's other options out there. If you're dealing with a wood frame structure like an RV, or if you have more room in the trailer where you actually frame it out with wood, that's a thermal break. You're not dealing with as many issues with the thermal properties of steel or aluminum in that scenario. You might have an argument more for other forms of insulation. A lot of these issues, we can't blame the manufacturer of the trailer. They never intended this to be a camper. So we have to work around certain things. That being said, once we insulate with this, if we're not having huge moisture problems, 2 inches of wool, R7, speaking from experience with doing something similar in camper vans, that's actually enough to keep the space pretty comfortable. You're still going to need an air conditioner on a hot day. You're still going to need a heater when it's cold, but it's not going to take a tremendous amount of energy to condition that space. Just a quick overview of what I do to insulate. I try to use scissors as much as I can just because it's a little bit more precise, but get yourself a pair of heavy scissors and it cuts super nice. If you need it to be thinner, you can tell there's layers in here and you can just, you can half it really easy. One side has more of a machined look. The other side is just a little bit more random, fluffy. So if you're trying to cut a whole length of wool, you can easily follow one of these lines and be pretty accurate. Smaller pieces work really well to cram in a little nooks and crannies. That's more of an issue with vans. It does create a little bit of dust, so I do tend to wear a mask. The easiest method I found for holding it in place until you get the wall panels up, I always cut it a little bit bigger so it kind of nestles in there nice and it holds itself up pretty well just doing that. You don't want to pack it super tight. You don't want to get it into this tiny little ball and stuffed it that tight, you got to give it room, obviously, to expand and get all those little air pockets in there. But you do want it to be compressed in there enough so that it doesn't move around with vibrations. I also use string across the walls. You got to get creative with how you attach the string. With furring strips, I had a surface to staple the string. Enough about that. Let's get back in the trailer. I'm sick of talking. All right. I added sealant in any sort of crack that was a lot of these places, like down here, you could see daylight through it. I don't know. And that's the crazy thing, is that's right where the tire is. So it's going to get all that road grime. All sorts of stuff is eventually going to get inside that trailer. So I got everything sealed up. The bigger cracks, I did a closed cell insulation, a spray foam. Anywhere there was a bigger gap, I used spray foam. Anything where there's a smaller gap, I used the fast cure sealant. But at this point, the only areas I have left to insulate for the wall where the wheel sits on the other side of that wall. So I'm going to butt in here real quick and show you this picture from before, if you didn't catch this. For some reason with my trailer, they bumped in the wheel well area into the interior space. So where the studs come down from the ceiling, where they meet the wheel well, it basically just transitions to a layer of sheet metal. So just on the other side of that is the exterior of the trailer and a tire. I don't really understand why they did it this way. It just seems overly complicated with how they constructed it. Makes it a lot harder to insulate. Obviously they didn't intend to insulate it, but even attaching the wall paneling, you can't put screws anywhere along the floor without risking putting a screw through a tire. So if somebody knows why they do this, or if this is common, please let me know. It's another reason why I wanted to add the furring strips to the walls, just because that adds just that little bit. Now I'll be able to put some foam insulation, and then the paneling will go over that. So it won't be as high of R value as the sheep's wool, but it'll be better than nothing, better than factory. That should do it. Then I should be able to put the wall paneling over top. I already have one piece of paneling that I brought in. I got a little ahead of myself. I'm so excited to put the paneling up that I just ran it in here, and I'm like, whoa, slow it down. I gotta do a couple things first. So next is to throw the wall panels up. That first one that I have there, it's pretty straightforward, but obviously a few of these are going to have to be modified. So originally I kind of thought I could use the existing fasteners, the existing screws that they used for the wall panels. I didn't get to use them at all. When I added my furring strips, didn't end up using them there, and I don't want to reuse them now because they are like a metal self-tapping screw. I don't think you're going to get the same kind of bite. I think a traditional construction screw, this is a 10 gauge, it's a 1-inch screw. I think that'll be just about perfect for going into the furring strip. You could do a longer screw and go through the furring strip into the frame again, but I think that's a little overkill. Plus, I'm trying to reuse existing holes that are in the panels, and if the screw was stripped out of the frame like they were in several places, you're going to have to go with a heavier gauge screw to make that work, and I think it's unnecessary. That's a long way of saying I'm going with a 1-inch screw. All right, so we've reached the back now. By we, I mean me. You haven't watched my previous episodes. I added extra bracing right here and up top for the ladder that's on the outside. So when I put this panel back, not only am I going to screw in the studs, I'm also going to add extra screws to all of that. So basically the load will be transferred not only to those braces, but also to the whole wall. That's the story behind that. I also left the factory vent in this location because a possible option is I wired for a fridge, a 12 volt like chest style fridge, to go somewhere up there for now, in case somebody wants this area more open in the back for toys, four-wheelers, whatever. But the option will be to build a bench here, and that bench could house the fridge. If you've ever had a DC fridge, they're super efficient, but they do produce heat. Any fridge will produce heat. it could be externally vented, which will help keep the interior space cooler during the summer. The other vent that was up front, that is being repurposed across the way where the electrical cabinet's going to be. The factory panel had this little, it's a nice kind of trim piece for that vent. Yeah, we're about a half an inch short. Okay, so this is what I've come up with. I've got this. This was originally a reflective, like, underlayment. Used to be able to get this at Menards, but I think they discontinued it. Pretty simple. Just cut a strip, tape it together. Now that air duct should reach that exterior vent. Now I could put that panel in place and secure it, as well as the one on top of that. I added extra screws to my bracing that was inside the wall there and up there. And that correlates with those standoff arms. So I haven't used this ladder since I installed it because I wanted this to be tied into the wall better. But I'm gonna actually put my weight on this for the first time. I've not tested this out yet, so this is a make it or break it. That's solid. That feels pretty good. That's pretty fun. Kind of forgot this was up here, honestly, underneath the tarp. I got it dirty. It's okay. So this section, well, it seems like it's pretty small because I don't have to worry about the door. It's just going to be pretty tedious. Starting over here, I have to cut out for a junction box, that bath fan, and an outlet. Then we get to this section over here. Took the screen out. I'll have to go outside and move this bungee, but I'll be able to push this out all together. Actually, I think I can do it right now. So from the outside, I'll be able to open it up the whole way, put that panel up and trace out, and then cut that out with my jigsaw. And then down here, I have to access the vent that's on the outside. I still haven't cut the sheep's wool for that. And then short power, and then a couple holes for all of this wiring to come out. And I've got a USB charger spot there, a couple more there. So yeah, it's gonna take me a little bit, but we're gonna start with that one over there. This was honestly such a tedious process. I edited out so much footage because it's just back and forth, back and forth. Put up a piece, have to trim out for this, have to trim out for that, have to shave one side down. That's to be expected. Nothing too difficult. The trickiest part was the window, mainly because I only had one shot at this. You know, if I mess up the cut, I'm gonna have to go out and buy more paneling. So typically how this works when you're installing a window, you'll cut the opening in the trailer, you'll cut out your wall on the inside, trim ring goes on the inside, obviously the window goes on the outside, and then when you screw those two pieces together, it sandwiches the wall and that's what secures it in place. But I wasn't so lucky. Well, be honest, Sean, luck actually had nothing to do with it. It was just inexperience. I've done a lot of camper things, but I've never installed a window. Anyway, it was a whole thing. Go back and check out that episode. I'm doing things kind of out of order. Once you get that wall cut out, you can set that trim ring inside and then you can screw it to the back side of that window. The window actually has a slot all the way around it on the inside. That's what accepts the screws. So you got to make sure your cutout is the right size or else your trim ring won't fit, or else you'll end up with big gaps around it. The trim ring, if it's like mine, isn't very wide, so you have to be very careful. But if all goes well, when you screw the trim ring to the window, it actually pulls the two pieces together and it really squeezes that wall, and that's what makes it super secure. But you will end up with a slight gap all around the inside parameter, and that's normal. Otherwise, if you didn't have a gap, that would mean your window and your trim ring would be touching each other, and that means you wouldn't have any clamping force when you screwed the two parts together. So it is normal to have that gap, but one thing to note, the corners weren't pulling in as tight as the rest of the window. I did end up drilling 4 more holes, 1 per corner, to add 4 more screws, and then I was able to pull the corners in and I had a nice uniform gap all around the window, and then, like I said, a little bit of sealant to fill that gap, and I think it looks great. So I forgot to cut out the hole for the vent that I relocated. This is going to be the battery box that I mentioned before. Next to that, you can see my shore power and the AC and DC wires. Up here, I've got a junction box. Then over here, I have another junction box. And this is the fan that can either be for a future bathroom or maybe for a kitchen. Then I've got an outlet down below that. Another junction box on the passenger side. This is for a future awning. I've got wires running over to this awning switch. Then I also have a dual zone dimmer switch for the ceiling lights and another switch to the right of that for the outside lights. Now down here, this is the DC outlets. One is just a regular DC outlet. This one is a twist lock outlet for Dometic fridges. Obviously this will work for other fridges, but I think Dometic is really smart with that locking feature. Much more secure, much safer. And then we have that vent that I already discussed. So that leaves only one more wall related thing that I still have to figure out, and that's the AC portholes. So I ended up finding these, I believe they're called duck flanges on Amazon. They're a really nice and inexpensive way to trim out these holes. I was really struggling to find anything else that wasn't absurdly expensive. So anyway, after a little bit more of the black sealant, and this job is done. And that's going to do it for this episode. So next up is going to be the ceiling. We'll finish insulating that, and then we're going to do the flooring, and then after that we'll have an episode on the electrical. So lots more to come. I'm excited to show you. Here's a little sneak peek, a little blurry tease, if you will, of what's to come. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch you next time.